Hi, I'm Greg Columbus. Welcome to Legal Leaders Exchange. This podcast series was created to deliver insights on optimizing legal operations for corporate legal and insurance claims professionals. This episode, Change Management Strategies for Your Legal Department, tackles how to approach, plan, and execute change in your legal department. When implementing new technologies or workflows like AI-enabled bill review or predictive analytics, successful leadership of change management is a critical component to ensuring a smooth transition and that your organization can ultimately realize the improved outcomes and insights that these technologies and workflows can offer. We are pleased to have Aliza Tarmohamed, General Manager for LegalView Bill Analyzer, and Vince Venturella, Associate Director for Technology Product Management, both at Wolters Kluwer's ELM Solutions. Aliza and Vince, welcome. I'll pass the conversation over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vincent Venturella. I'm our Director over our core applications here at Wolters Kluwer ELM.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aliza Tarmohamed. I'm the General Manager of the LegalView Bill Analyzer program here at Wolters Kluwer ELM Solutions. I'm very excited to be joining you, Vince, to sit down today and talk about effective strategies for change management.
Yeah, and we're going to look at that, especially through the lens of AI and these next generation technologies. You and I have been fortunate enough over the last several years, honestly, to have been really leading the charge on integrating a lot of these next generation tech, this AI, these advancements into people's work streams. But of course, as we've done so, we've seen that the road can be a little challenging, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things that we've seen, obviously with the LegalView Bill Analyzer solution, but across legal technology and insurance claims as a whole and legal operations, we're really seeing how these advanced technologies like AI, like machine learning, like predictive analytics can really change how people are working. And it's a really exciting time to see the kinds of advancements that we can make, the way that we can improve how people work, the quality of their work, the quality of their work experience. I think that what I've found really exciting is the sheer potential, the way that it can really shift how we think about core legal operations and claims workflows as we go forward. And there's a lot of excitement there. And Vince, I know you have a lot of exposure to that, particularly from the insurance world. And so maybe you can walk us through some of those before we jump into the change conversation.
Realistically, when you look across the broad landscape, a lot of things in people's enterprises are changing because of AI, because of these next generation technologies. Certainly our listeners probably are already familiar with some of these things being discussed in their company. Now, as you mentioned, my background is in insurance, and the reality is that is an area that has already embraced a lot of this change. If you look especially at the claims process, right? Okay, so what is fundamentally an insurance claim? We've all filed one in our lives. We've all had a fender bender or something happen with our house, right? We call up our insurance company, we file a claim. All we want to do is get it resolved and paid as fast as possible. But of course, we're not the only people who called that day. An insurance company receives hundreds, thousands of calls every day, right? And the old model is, well, you've got to have a human being there who's got to then create a case file and really look at it. And you've got to have all these risk analysis and how much do we pay? Is it going to go litigated? Questions galore, right? And that's time consuming and inefficient. And so what a lot of insurance companies realize is, hey, we can introduce AI into this process in a big way. And they've done it in a couple really key features. There's lots of places this is being explored, but the two I've seen the most uptake on are in things like the usage of AI to identify potential straight-through processing. This is basically, you call, you got a minor fender bender, you need a couple, you're slightly over your deductible, your car needs some repairs. Great, there's no fraud, there's no liability. Let's get this processed. Let's get a check paid. That's STP. AI is really good at identifying those markers of the claim that make it say, you know what, we don't even need a human to touch this. On the other side of the spectrum, and something that really leads into what we're going to talk about later, is this sort of decision support and analysis around things like fraud protection, right? Not frog protection, fraud protection. And that fraud protection is the key here, because insurance companies always have to be wary of insurance fraud, of course. And the trick is humans can be okay at sniffing it out, but a computer can be excellent at marking the potential, right, to find it, because it can look for those key elements of a claim and say, hey, wait a minute, this person has filed, or this organization has filed these X claims before. There seems to be a pattern here, or this individual one looks like these other ones that seem to be fraudulent. So it's that kind of pattern recognition that humans we can't hold all that in our brain at once, but a computer can do it in seconds.
Yeah. And I think you picked up on two really interesting things there, Vince, because there's two areas, and this applies to legal operations where I spend most of my time as well, that are really where AI, machine learning can really have that sort of paradigm shifting kind of impact on people's workflows. One is decision support, right? And you talked about that. And then the other, which you kind of alluded to, which is helping people prioritize and triage their work. And some of that is decision support, some of that is information, but it's also making sure that people are spending their valuable time and their valuable resources where it's going to have the most impact. And I think that as we think about, legal operations or insurance claims, all kinds of different sorts of organizations, everybody is trying to do more and more and more with less and less and less. And everybody knows this, that you're always trying to optimize your organization. Your broader organization is always asking you to optimize something in your department. Having that ability to use these technologies to not only improve the quality of the work and the quality of the decisions that you're making, but smoothing that process so that the experts and the thinkers and the strategists within your organization can really devote the time and attention where it should be, rather than sort of the day-to-day minutia, I think is such a exciting opportunity. And I think it's what's gotten people excited about applying these advanced technologies in their organizations, both in legal ops and insurance claims, because people are seeing that potential, that possibility. In bill review has been a great example where, bill review has been historically such a manual set of activities for a legal department or a claims organization, right? It involves a lot of manual staring at individual bills to try and figure out, is this compliant? Does it meet all of the requirements according to the billing guidelines? Do all of the charges here make sense? To your point with the claims example, it's the same sort of thing, being able to use AI to help define, these ones are compliant and they can go through, and here's where our experts should spend more time. Here's where there's questions to be asked or additional information that needs to be provided by the vendor to ensure that everybody in that ecosystem is getting what they need, both from a vendor relationship standpoint, a compliance standpoint, and ultimately the right information for future decision making.
When we talk about this, it's really two words that come to my mind: efficiency and efficacy, right? How are you making your people the most effective you can, and how are you making them the most efficient they can? And it's pretty obvious from our experience that these technologies can do that. But if that was all it was, we wouldn't be here today talking, right?
Right.
So the challenge is, okay, we know this works. We know that this can lever big increases in productivity. We can save a lot of money, right? And yet, here we are, 2021, and I think a lot of organizations, if you asked them, they would say that they feel like AI technologies and these kinds of things end up being hype over substance, right? That they haven't seen it. Now, as I said, there are some parts of the organization, maybe some types of organizations, certain verticals out there that have really been good at implementing this, right? But there's a lot of people who are struggling. So why do you think that is? Why is it so hard for some of these companies, some of these workflows, these verticals to implement this technology successfully? What's standing in their way?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. And you're so right, because it's a conversation we have a lot where people say, it sounds great. I love the idea of applying advanced technologies to my workflows. But you know what? We tried this before. It was a mess. We spent a whole bunch of money. We invested a lot of time and we didn't see the bang for our buck. And it just doesn't feel like it's worth it. And honestly, I think the simplest answer to your initial question, Vince, is change is really hard. It's hard for all of us, irrespective of the workflow you're in, irrespective of the business that you're in, whatever functional group you sit in. As human beings, change is really hard. And as we talked about before, for a lot of organizations, right, where everybody's trying to do the 27 priorities they have on their list, they've got a whole whack of goals they have to complete for that quarter, that year, that 3-year strategy planning period, whatever the time box might be. The idea of implementing change and the attention, investment, resourcing, management, hands-on day-to-day management that ushering change into an organization requires can often be something that seems like a nice to have, but not a must have. And ultimately what we've seen is that without having a really strong discipline and practice around how to manage change through the organization, it's true that a lot of teams won't see the benefit of the investments that they're making. Challenging implementations can mean that you won't see the kinds of results or outcomes that you expected because you didn't think about all the different areas of the workflow that needed to be implemented or needed to be brought through a change management process. It might be that everybody isn't reading from the same book. They may not all agree with the benefits that happen because everyone doesn't feel like they were brought along in that change. It may involve a workflow or a process change versus how someone's been doing their job for the last 15 years. Well, that's a difficult experience for a lot of people. And working through that and understanding that human beings need support as you go through that change, without doing those things, it can really cause a lot of pitfalls where then the value of whatever this change was going to be gets lost.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of the devil we know versus the devil we don't know sort of here,
absolutely.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Where when you have these established workflows, manual as they may be, inefficient as they may be, non-value add as they may be, right? Like I'm sure at some point, almost everybody that's hearing us right now, as well as ourselves, have gone through a lean training. And they teach you over and over again to remove this non-value add from your work streams. And yet every manual work stream I've ever seen in my career, even before I came here, when I was on the other side of the equation, right, always had these non-value add steps because it was the established workflow. It's tradition. It's what we've always done. Yeah. It's, well, we have to have these 5 additional reviews because the 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million chance that something goes wrong. Right. So it's just easier to keep doing it. We know what the cost is there.
Right. I think it's so interesting that you say that because I think that's exactly it. There's a trust factor, right? Yes, this may be manual and painful and it's 2021 and why are we still doing it that way? But you know what? I can be sure it's right. And if I don't have that same trust in whatever change you're going to put into my organization, I'm going to be really resistant to that because at least this way, I know that nobody's going to get fired for whatever we're doing today because it works and it's worked for the last 15 or 20 years or 30 years or whatever the case might be.
It's really interesting here because you have almost 2 levels of challenges at least. So let me set up this paradigm and see if you agree with it. When we're talking about inserting a new technology or changing a workflow in a significant way, we have sort of 2 major hurdles. Hurdle 1 is the leadership of the organization, right? And so maybe someone who's listening, this is someone trying to motivate change and they're thinking, I really know it's a good idea, but I can't get the rest of my leadership on board with this, right? They're not ready to come along to make this leap. So there's the convincing them it needs to move, right? That's really what you were just putting a finger on there in a big way. But I think then as well, there's the user level of convincing as well. The people who are in this workflow, oftentimes I've found that the people who are using the inefficient workflow, who are suffering through the painful workflow, still aren't very apt to change, right?
Right.
not to make sort of a matrix comparison, but they don't want to unplug. Right?
Yes.
They're very much, because again, they know that system. And so you're right. It's trust at two different levels. The trust that you're going to make what they're doing, the user, what they're doing better, and trust for the leaders that what you're selling isn't smoke.
Yeah.
Right. That there's going to be a real return there. And we haven't even talked about actually learning how to use this stuff, right? Which is normally what you think of when you think of change management and these new solutions. You think, oh, I got to learn a new software program or a new process. I got to learn what I'm supposed to click, where, how, when, where I submit the paperwork to, who needs to sign what form, whatever. Because the reality is most of these technologies, certainly this is the case for the stuff that we've built, it doesn't have any real change in that regard, right? People still end up using the same workflows. You can go to the same place on the screen. You probably click the same penultimate or ultimate button. Maybe you don't do as many clicks. Things get faster, especially in the case of all the decision support tools we've built. It's just more information to recommend to you what to do, right? Here, let me make this easier for you. Instead of reading 100 things, read one thing, and then you can make the best possible decision. That sort of thing. So it's interesting because it doesn't have those traditional change management problems of, oh, I need to learn in the software where to click. It has this whole other dimension, which I think has honestly proven more challenging.
Yeah.
Because getting people are sort of used to in their life, oh, new version of Windows is out. Oh, new version of Office is out, whatever. Oh, they moved my button. I hate that they moved my button. Why is Google always moving my button in this in my program or whatever, right? But we're all used to it. It's sort of part and parcel of being alive in the 21st century. Whereas with this, it's more than just a where do I click change. It's an attitude change, right? I now have to trust a machine as part of my workflow.
Yes.
Right. I have to be willing to bring this thing on as not just some reactive engine I type into, but as a proactive partner in the processes that I am engaging in.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge, right?
I think that's exactly right. And what's interesting about that is that kind of change, right? Not just changing a piece of software, but that kind of change is a much bigger hurdle for a lot of folks, as you mentioned, but also requires a different change management approach and a lot more upfront investment in time, in consensus building, in not training in the traditional way, but more education about how to work with these kinds of tools. That is not sort of the typical, hey, we put in a new piece of enterprise software, everybody go through 3 hours of training this afternoon, which is the typical enterprise approach to change management. This involves a much softer set of skills, but also a more complex approach to change management that requires a lot more upfront time, as opposed to tossing people into using a new system and seeing where they can break it or where they can have challenges, which is typically what happens for a lot of organizations when they roll out a new HR enterprise system or a new financial planning tool or something like that. This really does require a different, more programmatic approach to people leadership.
I think you really were setting the groundwork there for our first piece of advice, right? And so let me put out this potential piece of advice. That before you ever consider making a change like this, you have to make sure your organization is ready, that you're prepping your people, that they're willing to change, that they understand that there's going to be a journey here. In other words, you have to get your people excited about the potential to improve, right? Does that seem like a critical first step to you?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Vince. I think the sort of classic thinking around how is this going to benefit these different parts of the organization, and being able to communicate to those different parts of the organization what is in it for them? What is going to be the benefit of this? And oftentimes I talk to people about this idea of how are you going to sell this internally? And everyone always feels a little uncomfortable with that. I don't want to feel like I'm being salesy. And it's really more about how are you bringing your organization along in the change that you're trying to drive? Because as a leader, for example, you may be a leader of a legal operations function. Well, the goals that you have for the kind of change you might be implementing and how you're going to measure success might look very different than for the daily user for whom their workflow is going to change. And helping them understand what the benefit is for that individual user is very different than what you might be reporting up to the general counsel or the CFO of your organization. And so being able to really create that foundation first, the framework of here are our different matrixed goals, and here's how each of the different stakeholders or constituents in your environment are going to benefit from this change is very fundamental, right? Because that allows you to then have those conversations with each of those stakeholders and help them understand here's why we're making this change and here's what it will look like for you.
Exactly. When you're evaluating these technologies, and look, people do this with us, and I hope that when they push us on these items, that they then use that and share that internally, because you need to push on what exactly as you said, what are the values, what are the benefits? And by the way, those are going to be different depending on who the audience is within your organization that you're trying to sell this to, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, your frontline users, the people who might be having their workflows disrupted, if you go to them and say, well, we're going to save 2% of some, cost per year, they're like, okay, great, I guess.
Right.
Like, good for you. But I don't understand what that means to me.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, of course, we're all good corporate citizens. We all want our companies to be financially responsible, solvent, successful, whatever.
Right.
But in the end, what I want to hear as a user is this is going to provide you information that you've been asking for. If you normally maybe have to run a report for this information, it takes a while and it's laborious, or you've got to put in a request to get this information with the reporting team, or this task that I know you all don't like because you all complain about it every group meeting we have that takes an hour or two of your day you could be dedicating to the work you want to do or need to do, right? Well, I'm going to turn that hour or 2 hours into 10 minutes. Okay. All right. Now I like what we're saying here, right? Now we're getting somewhere that's a real value, that's a real benefit to me. Whereas when I'm looking up the organizational chain, then all of a sudden what I'm looking is, what's that ROI, or how much money are we going to save, or what's it going to produce in terms of our, higher level of satisfaction amongst our people, increase in productivity, efficiency, whatever. There's lots of different measures that could be here. But I know when we talk to our clients about this, people push us on that stuff. And so I really, and we certainly provide it. I know you and I are very used to having to show the numbers, show the facts. And I really hope that then these leaders take that and have those conversations internally, because sharing that kind of information upfront early in the project. And I really think, as someone who used to work in operations, there's often this, I don't know what to call it. It's almost like this veil of secrecy that operations feels like they have to have. Well, we don't want to share too much with users. We don't want to tell them too much about what's going on. We don't want to get them too excited. No, I want them excited. I want them banging down the door, ready to make their lives better, right? Because in the end, that's what's going to help them with these technologies. Right.
It's such a good point. And there's one thing that, as you mentioned about operations, I was grinning a little bit because in my past life, I did a lot of work running sort of complex integrations, post-merger integrations. And that exact conversation about, we don't want to share too much. We don't want to tell people too much because the change is going to be scary for them, really is something that I still hear today. And it's an interesting concept because you mentioned something earlier about how ready is your organization for change. Organizations have muscle memory. So the last time that you went through a change, and it doesn't necessarily mean a workflow change, maybe it was an acquisition integration, maybe it was a reorganization, maybe it, your leadership change, whatever it might be. However that last change went is how your organization is going to fear this change going. Because no matter what, they'll say, hey, I remember last time, and last time they told us we were going to save 2%. And you know what? All they did was make my life difficult. And I don't even know if we ever got the 2% because I don't see the information and it doesn't make its way down to me. And so I don't trust what I'm hearing. And I certainly have seen that in other environments. And one of the things that I think I have seen work so well with the clients that we partner with when they're putting in these kinds of changes is an acknowledgement of, in the past, we have struggled with successfully managing change within the time bounds or realizing the value in the first 12 months or whatever the prior hiccups are. That degree of sort of, we understand where you've had challenges before. Here's what we're doing differently this time makes a huge difference for not only at the user level, but also at the leadership level to engender that kind of trust in, hey, we get it. We understand what we didn't do right the first time or what we could do better going forward. And here's how we're going to do that. It really makes a big difference to be able to say, we understand where the organization might have sensitivity because of what might have happened in the past, even if it was with a different team.
And that to me leads into sort of two areas. So the first one is, you as someone trying to be the instrument of this change has to know your organization. That muscle memory comment is so dead on, because I've been part of some organizations that really have a muscle memory to adapt big change, right? They're comfortable with it. They've made their people comfortable with it. They've done big changes multiple times and they went well. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is the organization as a whole becomes more agile. Right? They're flexible. They're ready because they have trust that the big change isn't going to be scary change, bad change, worse for them. Right? They've been through it a couple times. It worked out well. Fantastic. If that's your organization, then you can probably jump into something like this, in a bigger way without needing to maybe prep work, lay the groundwork, set up the runway for all your users because they're going to come along for the ride. But that's not many organizations, right? No. Most of them require a lot more, let's call it consensus building, right? Yeah. Not that organizations are a democracy, but oftentimes you do need the sort of will of the governed, right?
Yeah.
And I think that one of the ways you do that is when you've said, okay, here's the value, the benefit to you. Who's interested in participating with this, right? Instead of it just being operations, instead of it just being maybe a couple leaders in the room, have some of those users, those people who are highly impacted in the room with you as you're talking through this potential change, this solution, this technology, whatever it is, right? Especially if you're dealing with things like AI, because the AI needs to know how the users really and actually work if it's going to provide the best things like decision support, right? It wants to know the real decisions they make. We want to train it in that way. Mm-hmm. And so having them in the room is a benefit to everybody. One, the AI, that technology gets smarter faster. It delivers better results once it's live, hence building the trust and higher adoption. It's a win throughout the entire thing.
Right.
But secondly, if those users are in the room and they start getting excited because they're right there close to it, they see, the discussion that's happening, they see the tests, the models, whatever's spitting out information, right? And they're like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden they become zealots within your organization. They'll proselytize and bring the other users along with them. Because in the end, people trust their peers more than they trust managers. I mean, that's just the nature of how we work, right?
Yeah.
So when their own peers are saying, no, this is cool. Trust me. This is like, I'm going to give you the straight story. You want to come along with this. This is going to be great. All of a sudden now you're going to have people in a much better learning mode ready to go.
I think that's so true. And that is something that we have seen over and over again is when we talk about building consensus, It's building consensus at each of the different layers of the organization so that you have those zealots, those evangelists within your organization that can speak to the day-to-day problems that their peers are facing. I think one of the really exciting things for me and for my team is when we're going through these kinds of implementations, and we're working with different folks and folks that are on the ground and users of the technology, is seeing the light kind of go off in their eyes where they're like, oh, wait, I have a problem that I'm dealing with right now in my day job that I could see how this would help solve. That's the kind of thing where you're able to make it really real for people. And that goes a very, very long way to making sure that people are enrolled in that change. The other thing I would like to raise too, Vince, is as you talked about the readiness of the organization, folks that have done a lot of change already that are really used to that, where you might be able to move faster versus folks that maybe haven't had a lot of change in their organization or they haven't had a lot of successful change. I think it's important to have that flexibility to acknowledge and recognize the kind of organization and teams you have and say, how do we structure a change management program in a way that fits who we are, not who we wish we were, but who we are today. And that might mean, you know what, a big bang where we unroll everything all at once. That might be too much. That might be something that has the potential to scare parts of the organization or potentially too much risk. And unfortunately, the challenge with a change management program is that if the initial rollout is bumpy, each subsequent phase is that much more challenging. And so you really want to make sure that the low-hanging fruit, the easier, kind of more defined problems might be the ones you tackle first in a first phase to help demonstrate to the organization, we know how to do this. We're rolling this out in a measured way. We're going to report out to all of you the results and the outcomes that we're seeing with this first phase. And then we're going to proceed with the second phase that might be a more broader rollout to multiple different groups within the organization. Being able to do that in a very measured way helps to, again, build that trust we were talking about earlier.
You just hit upon something really key I want to draw out for everybody there, which is measure the effectiveness of what you're doing and share it.
Yeah.
Right? I see a lot of people do maybe most of the first part, right? They've got a little measurements. Maybe we run them for a little while, but that second part is so rare. Again, this has to do with building that muscle memory, right? If you share the measurements, if you show that things are positive, that things are working, that there is in fact a benefit that's happening, then you're going to only improve overall people's readiness to go down this road in the future, to continue expanding that footprint, right? But that's a critical feedback loop. I think a lot of times the feedback rolls up to leaders, they go, oh, that's great, and then it stops. That's it, right? Yep. Now, ultimately, no numbers on a report, on a dashboard, are going to be stronger than the lived experience of the user, right?
Of course.
So, of course, if that speaks right to your, make sure you're rolling it out correctly at a sort of, at a tolerance level they can have, right? Every organization has a certain tensile strength. They can bend so far before they break, right? So make sure you know, are you dealing with aluminum or titanium or what exactly is in your organization, right?
Right.
But beyond that, assuming that the users are like, okay, yeah, this is going well, then that feedback loop helps close it off. And most importantly, it helps them feel like, yes, we were part of this. I was a user who was in the room. I said this was going to be good. I recommended we do it. I'm now reaping benefits from it. And I'm now seeing that leadership sees I was right. This is good, right? Yeah. That whole virtuous cycle that happens there creates and instills that trust to allow for these future changes. Because let's be honest, it's not like we're talking about any one project here. Even just if you were getting solutions from us, from Wolters Kluwer ELM, we have multiple different AI empowered and service-based solutions across our suite of products, right? Throughout different workflows. So if you started with just us, you could go through 4, 5, 6 different implementations, right? Or whatever, or selections of things that were going to change your workflows. So you want your people ready for this, right?
Yeah.
Because this is just going to be the world in the next 5 to 10 years in a big way.
That's exactly right. And the one thing I'd like to highlight there is, so we talked a lot about communicating, here's what's working well. In those phased approaches, what I have seen to be really valuable is also being honest about sometimes things are going to go wrong. Something's not going to go the way that we thought it would. And one of the things that I personally have found to be really valuable when we've been working with clients that have that degree of maturity around how they handle change is to be willing to say, all right, we're doing this in a phased approach. Let's gather feedback about what worked and let's gather feedback about what didn't so that we can evolve and iterate for the future phase. And this can be difficult for organizations sometimes because no matter what, people have put their heart and soul and effort into projects like this, into implementing these changes. They may have been, the person going in and pounding the table saying, we have to make this investment. And that doesn't mean that it wasn't a good decision. But sometimes you have to make some pivots. You have to make some changes. And having that cultural safety to be able to do that, but also gathering all of that feedback so that your users and your leaders feel like they can come and say, this part is working great. You know what? I didn't like how we did this bit. How do we change that? That feedback will allow the process to run more smoothly as you go forward. It's also going to help make sure that all of the constituents in that ecosystem feel like they're part of it, not just when you're sharing good news, but also when you're sharing valuable feedback. And it's going to help to develop more of that resiliency within the organization for future change, not just whatever project it is you're doing at that time. And that can be a challenging thing for a lot of corporate organizations. It's something that I've seen with clients of ours that have really approached change in a thoughtful way, and have had that commitment to continuous improvement as they go through this kind of an approach. And I've seen it really work well to bring organizations that might have been otherwise reluctant along in that environment.
Yeah. And, as I look at let's talk about some of the things that we personally have on offer and kind of what we've put out there. Yeah. Obviously, you already mentioned Bill Review, our Legal View Bill Analyzer service. That's our AI-powered bill review. This is, again, a thing we've seen tremendous growth in over the past several years because, to me, this fits all of the hallmarks. And the clients who have been the most successful with it have been the ones who did all the steps you're talking about, right? Who prepared their people for change, who shared why this is a benefit, and their users see it. They're not spending time reviewing every line of an invoice anymore. They're saving more money. The users are benefiting, right? Everybody in the organization loves this. That's one of those things. And so when we share that information, we bring it along, and then it proves out as it goes live. We've seen that over and over again, right? You look at something like our intelligent invoice conversion, which is using AI to convert paper invoices into electronic ones. Same story again, right? Somebody was sitting at a desk manually keying something into a computer. It was the definition of non-value add work, and instantly overnight it disappears. That person's now free to do what they need to actually do. All the way up to, say, one of our more recent offerings like Predictive Insights, which is decision support for selecting your law firm partners and provides you upfront budgeting ranges and things like that when a new matter is open. So you're always making the best decisions throughout the life cycle of the case. Who are we going to work with on this matter, on this litigated file? What's the budget we should set? How quick should we resolve it? When should it settle? Whatever the decision you're making is, suddenly the user's empowered with data. Again, no extra work they had to do. They just suddenly have at their fingertips data that they never had before. When you make it that easy, like we've tried to do, I find that people just become, it's sort of easier for them to adapt to because it feels more like other experiences in their life, right? And this is kind of the final thing I'll say is, as this goes on, helping your folks draw parallels with their other lived experiences can also be a great way to get them more comfortable. This sounds silly, but it's so important. One of the ways I always explain predictive insights is I say, well, have you ever used Yelp? Well, yeah, sure, of course. Right? Or have you ever used Amazon? You look at a review? Sure, of course. This is the same basic principle, right? When I buy things now, I spend maybe too many hours. Honestly, I think my wife would say too many hours reading every review for that before I'm like, okay, this is the one. This is the one I'm going to get. I trust this one,
right?
Because I want that data, right, to make those decisions. And so when I look at these, the organizations that have been successful in working with us are those that have followed exactly what we're talking about here, involved their people at an early stage, got them excited, shown the value and the benefit, proved it out, anticipated that there will be bumps along the road, prepped their people for that potential, right? And then measured and shared that as it goes on, as the actual life of the thing evolves. Okay, what didn't I touch on there? What else do we want to leave people with?
I think you covered a lot there, Vince. I think the one thing that I would add is where it can be really valuable for organizations where, for a lot of people, they don't have all of the resources or the experience to do many of the things that we're talking about here. The more that you can rely on partnering with folks that can help usher you through that change is a hugely valuable thing. For almost everyone we work with, they have a day job, and their day job is not leading change. Their day job is a lot of other things. And so one of the areas where personally I've been really excited to work with our clients is to come in and partner and provide that playbook, those best practices, to be able to provide the support, including, the content to help educate folks on the change that will be coming there. Really being able to partner with our clients to be able to deliver the right pace of change for their organization has been an incredibly valuable experience, I think, for us and for my team. But I think it's also been able to ensure for a lot of our clients that they're able to see those kinds of results. And so I think it's important to have an understanding of how prepared and ready is your organization for the change, but also who can you partner with that has the resources to support it, so that you're not trying to reinvent the wheel all by yourself. Because it can become a very difficult burden on top of everything else that we know our clients are trying to do in their day jobs, without being able to rely on the best practices and the expertise from across the industry, where other folks have gone before, right? Use those learnings, be able to rely on those learnings, and not only by partnering with us, but also learning from your peers. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about what's happening in the industry now, where I feel like a lot of those barriers are starting to come down. There's a lot more of sharing of best practices, of expertise, of here's what worked in my organization, you're welcome to try it in yours. Those kinds of conversations, I think, can be incredibly helpful and something that we've been really pleased to be a part of with our clients.
Couldn't have said it better. All right. I think we got everything.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Vince. This was a great conversation.
It was absolutely fantastic. Eliza, always a pleasure.
Those were Eliza Tar-Mohamed, General Manager of LegalView Bill Analyzer, and Vince Venturella, Associate Director of Technology Product Management, both from Wolters Kluwer's ELM Solutions. This podcast is hosted by Wolters Kluwer's ELM Solutions, the market-leading provider of enterprise legal spend and matter management, contract lifecycle management, and legal analytics solutions. For more information and additional guidance, please visit www.wolterskluwer.com or call 1-713-572-3282. Please join us for future podcasts on optimizing legal operations and achieving your legal and business goals.